Hey guys, I'm Ari. Welcome back. Today we're going to be going over what I plan to read for my challenge, where I read a book every single year from 1900 to 2020, and it goes by decade. So February is going to be 1911 through 1920. And February is kind of a theme month, but not a whole lot of interesting writing was published in the 1910s. So it's kind of on theme where I can find something that fits the theme, and then it's not on theme where I'm just kind of like throwing whatever I can fit into it. So the theme is romance. I'm trying to find things that either are romance novels or have a romantic aspect to it. And another thing that I found is when I went to my library, I found one of these books that's just available, period, at my library. Or I guess technically 3 of them were available at my library, but 2 of them I owned already and didn't need to get from my library. But out of the 7 books that I was looking for at my library, I found 1. So I had to get a little bit creative with how I found these books. First things first, I want to talk a little bit about what was happening in the 1910s so you can kind of get a sense of what people are writing about in this time. Now, the 2 major things as far as race and discrimination were going, or that was happening in the 1910s, was the women's suffrage movement began, and there was a lot of like extreme racism against Japanese people. So those are the 2 major political suffrage type things that were happening just throughout the decade. In 1912, the Titanic sinks. So just to kind of give you a time frame for something that most of you probably know about. In 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, which leads to, in that event, was what most people consider the thing that basically started World War I. The war officially started in 1917, and between 1914 and the end of the decade, you could tell that people weren't focused on writing. People were focused on this war and the political climate around that. And I have a feeling we're going to see the same hit to literature being published when World War II happens. Another thing that happens at the end of this decade, which will highly influence the 1920s, more so than what I'm reading this decade, is Prohibition starts in 1919. So for those of you who do not know what Prohibition is, they made alcohol illegal. So consumption, ownership of alcohol is no longer legal in the United States starting in 1919. The first book up is for 1911 is The Winning of Barbara Worth by Harold Bell Wright. And before I get into the synopsis of this book, I want to talk to you about this specific copy. I found this copy at a thrift store for under $5, and this is the original published novel from 1911. Like, this is in such amazing condition for being 100 years old, or over 100 years old now, but originally published, amazing condition copy. But this book is about Barbara Worth, who 5 men find Barbara in the eastern Colorado plains near the body of her mother when she is a small child. And this is basically the story of her growing up and how she affects the life of those 5 men. It's Western, like cowboy type novel from what I can tell. And it sounds like a romance. So we're on brand for February so far. For 1912, we have The Melting of Molly. I could not find a physical copy of this, so I bought it very cheaply on Kindle. It was either like 99 cents or maybe free. This is about a 25-year-old widow who has a bunch of men trying to marry her, and she has to decide who she's going to marry. It sounds like a fairly typical romance novel, so I'm kind of interesting to see what the 1912 take of contemporary romance is. Next up for 1913 is the only book I could find at my library, which was Pollyanna by Eleanor Porter. And you guys remember Anne of Green Gables from last month? Because this is the exact same story from the sound of it. Pollyanna is a little orphan girl who is very positive, very happy, and she goes to live with her kind of strict aunt, I believe, after her parents die. And it's the story of her growing up in that household where she's not particularly wanted, but she's so energetic and happy she makes everybody fall in love with her. So it sounds exactly like Anne of Green Gables. And I liked Anne of Green Gables, so I'm okay with this. For 1914, we are reading Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I'm sure most of you have seen like Tarzan movies and stuff like that. There's a Disney version cartoon, there's a newer one that came out with Alexander Skarsgård, and he is hella pretty in that. I do know the basic story, so I assume that there's a romantic aspect in this as far as Tarzan and Jane. So he meets Jane. For those of you who have no idea anything about Tarzan, basically a British couple is stranded on the coast of, like the African coast, and they have a child, and then they die, leaving the child alone, and a ape finds the child, and it's a gorilla in the movies. I think it just says an ape on the synopsis of this. I'll find out for sure later, but an ape finds the child and raises the child, and it's kind of a questioning of like how humanity acts when it has no humanity. If we didn't have culture, if we didn't have beliefs, if we didn't have religion, like what's to keep people from being just bestial and violent? I understand that this is supposed to be a lot more violent than the actual movie. Tarzan is physically appealing, but he is very violent, gruff, abusive. So it's going to be an interesting take on a story that we all see as like Tarzan's a savior of Africa is what you normally see. I don't think that's actually what the book is, but we're gonna find out. For 1915, I have another ebook. It is K by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. And honestly, I chose this book because the name of it is the letter K. And it's not like K-Y, it's just the letter K is the entire name of the book. And when I'm being passive aggressive, that is my favorite response to end arguments that I don't want to be a part in. It's like, you say something stupid and I will respond to you, K. It makes me happy that there's a book called that, which that's nothing what it has nothing to do with that, but that's the vibe I got from the title. What this is a historical romance, so still on brand for February. It is also a mystery, so romantic mystery sounds good. It's about a boarding house, or maybe a woman who runs a boarding house. It wasn't super clear, and one of the boarders is a mysterious person named Kay, and apparently there's some mystery about this. Actually, I guess the person's not named Kay, their initial is K. Like, all they know about the boarder is I think it's a him, his initial is just the letter K, and there's some mystery surrounding this boarder and a romance. Mystery romance. I have no idea what this book is about, is basically what I'm getting at, but we're gonna read it anyway. For 1916, I am going to read A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. And I'm going to cut it out, but I had to say that like 4 times to get it right. This is a fiction story, but it's based off of Joyce's life in basically growing up with his family, growing up Irish, different things like that. Like, Irish were very discriminated against for a long time in both America and England. And this is kind of him growing up Irish and then struggling through life, relationships, family, different things like that. I have a physical copy, but I put up the picture here of it because my physical copy you're gonna laugh at me for. I happen to have an old textbook, English textbook from college that just has the story in it. So I'm gonna read it out of the textbook so I don't have to purchase it, but I didn't want to hold up the Norton Anthology of English Literature Volume F as an example of the book that I'm reading. For 1917, I am reading A Jury of Her Peers, which is a short story by Susan Glaspell. It is basically 2 women uncovering a rural murder investigation. There wasn't much more about that, but it is a short story. I believe it's only like 60 pages or so, so you can't really say much about it. I don't know if there's a romantic aspect in this or if it's just a murder mystery, so that one's kind of up in the air. Next, in 1918, is a novel called Sunflower by Gula Crudi. I think I pronounced that correctly. This book is a romance based on a woman who like returns to her country estate from the city because she fell in love with like a charlatan who like didn't actually want her. He was just trying to take advantage of her. And she fell head over heels in love. He was just using her. She's trying to get over it, so she went back to her country estate. And then I think a bunch of people, like a bunch of men there, trying to fall in love with her. A lot of what I was reading about it is it's supposed to be really weird and macabre and erotic. So 1918 erotica? This could be a thing. I'm down for it. Next is A Damsel in Distress by P.G. Wodehouse. This is the first book in a series of, like, I believe murder mysteries, but this one's a romance. I was confused too. Maybe it was like comedic mysteries. This one's still a romance. A woman is supposed to marry her step cousin, like her aunt's stepson. Whatever. She's supposed to marry her step cousin, and she's not in love with him. She's in love with a mysterious American man, and she runs away, and she is brought home by this American man who is not the man she's in love with, and comedy ensues, is kind of what the synopsis said. So, romantic comedy from 1919? Why not? And my last book for the decade is Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I loved The House of Mirth that I read last month. That was 5 stars, so I'm very, very excited to read another novel by this author. This is it's a very big book. This is 3 novels in here. This has The House of Mirth, Custom of the Country, and Age of Innocence in it. So it's not as big as it looks. This is 3 books. Age of Innocence seems a lot like House of Mirth. You've got a scandal in New York, but this is from a man's perspective instead of a woman's this time. Basically, a man is wealthy, New York society man, is engaged to marry a woman, and she is very boring. And he falls in love with a widower who is very interesting and spicy. he has to decide if he's going to do his duty and marry the woman he's supposed to, or if he's going to follow love and marry the woman that he wants to. And based off the previous novel that she wrote, I'm going to make a guess right now and say that it's going to end miserably and he's going to do his duty to marry the woman that he has to, and the girl he's in love with is probably going to kill herself. That's my guess on the ending. I don't know why. Like, these books sound so depressing, and they really are depressing, but they're so amazingly well written that I love them. Or at least House of Mirth that's how I felt about that. That book also won a Pulitzer Prize in 1921, so it just means it's better, right? Of course, it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, it has to be better. But that is it for the books I am reading for this decade of my century challenge. If you've read any of these books, have any tips, have any questions, drop them down below in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe and follow me on Instagram. And I'll see you Tuesday.